This spring, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on the legality of Arizona's new tough immigration law, and the ruling will likely have widespread implications for immigration policy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Comcast Newsmakers on the Vote. I'm Robert Tranum, and I'm joined by Phil Musser, Republican strategist and former advisor to Governor Mitt Romney, and Kristian Ramos, policy director with NDN, a progressive think tank here in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Kristian, let me start off with you. So this is a really big hot button issue. Immigration has always been a hot topic. Why does the Supreme Court need to deal with this in the middle of a 2012 election?
Well, I think what first we need to just sort of set a basic understanding here that our current immigration system is broken. And I think everybody can agree that the federal government needs to come together and fix it. Do something about this in the long term, because honestly, I'm sympathetic with states who are having to deal with problems associated with immigration, with an immigration system that was designed for 50, 60 years ago. So the Supreme Court absolutely has to deal with this as soon as possible, because the real situation is becoming now that you're seeing more states looking to pass immigration legislation that is, increasingly punitive and damages their local economies, and what's happening in Georgia and Alabama, where you're seeing a lot of the local citizens and the undocumented workforce leaving those states, going to other states. The reason that we have a national federal policy on immigration is because those groups of workers are not leaving the country, they're merely going to other states. And the reality is, even if the Supreme Court finds parts of this constitutional and other parts unconstitutional, what you're going to end up seeing is, several states passing laws like this, but the majority of the states in this country are not going to pass similar laws, and you're going to have a patchwork of laws that don't work for the country as a whole.
Phil, to Kristian's larger point, he is basically saying that, look, this is a federal issue. The Supreme Court needs to rule on this issue because the states have been burdened. Governor Jan Brewer, who is the current governor of Arizona, has repeatedly said the reason why we are meddling, if you will, in a federal issue is because the federal government has not stepped up to the plate. Do you understand that argument, and do you agree with it?
Yeah, I understand the argument. I completely agree with it. I mean, Barack Obama ran for president promising comprehensive immigration reform. Didn't happen, right? I mean, here we are with states who essentially are having to go out and deal with the realities of illegal immigration in their states, and each state is taking a different approach, right? Some states have probably pushed the boundaries too far, other states maybe haven't. But I mean, a lot of states are using common sense things like requiring e-verify of in-state employers, requiring, different measures of kind of background checks before driver's licenses are being implemented.
And different measures of documentation.
And different, I mean, just as we speak here today, the governor of New Mexico, Susana Martinez, ran and was elected overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis in 2010 on a pledge to essentially not provide driver's license to illegal immigrants. It's an issue that can cut and be explained both ways politically, but the reality is that absent federal action, and frankly the Department of Justice is suing Arizona over this suit, the states have to do what they have to do in order to move the ball forward to meet the basic security needs of their citizenry. And so, frankly, just to go back to where you started, yeah, the Supreme Court has got two big political hot-button footballs in their lap this spring. One is this immigration decision. The other is the health care decision. Both issues get Republican primary voters pretty motivated.
Kristian, go ahead, very quickly.
Well, no, I just wanted to follow up. In the basic construct of what you're saying, you put this on the president, but the reality is the president has taken common sense steps to improve our current legal immigration system. The real problem remains in Congress, and I would say a lot of that burden is actually on the Republican Party. In a political sense, I believe they don't really have a legislative path forward for fixing this.
Meaning the Republican Party?
The general platform is there is no path forward in fixing our current legal immigration system through Congress. And what's frustrating to me is, as we enter an election year, is I think people in Congress are much closer, congressman to congressman, senator to senator, on what needs to be done to fix this thing, but the political side of this thing continues to rear its head, making it all but impossible for Congress to act on this, which is the appropriate place.
We saw during the Republican presidential debates in the fall and also last winter, the majority of the Republican presidential candidates, specifically Governor Rick Perry from Texas when he was in the race, Ron Paul and so forth, were basically saying we have to create a very strong border and that fence needs to be protected. Some people would argue that that's just way too simplistic, that there's just no way that you can protect a 1,500-mile, 2,000-mile border between us and Mexico. What is the solution? What is the solution to the problem?
Well, I think if you're talking about specifically the border, I think there's a couple things, basic facts that maybe Mr. Perry or Mr. Paul are unfamiliar with, although that would be surprising because Mr. Perry is from Texas. the border is actually safer on the American side than it has ever been in the entire history of the country, in the sense that you have more boots on the ground in terms of the National Guard, in terms of the military being there. If I am a cartel member, which is, you know, where a lot of this border alarmist stuff happens, I'm not crossing over to the American side of the border because I know I will have several guys with machine guns there to meet me. So that this violence on the southern part of our border, on the American side, is at the lowest that it's ever been in the history of the country, number one. Number two, migration into the country from undocumented immigrants is at zero for the first time since Richard Nixon was president, which means that you have less people you have the same amount of people entering that you do as leaving, and the only people that are actually trying to get back into the country are people who have lived here for 20 years, who have families, who have served in the military, and who have been caught up in a very vigorous enforcement of our deportation laws.
Phil, a few years ago, the Senate Democrats tried to pass a bill called the DREAM Act, which was supposed to be a legal, safe, realistic path to citizenship that would allow, and I'm paraphrasing here, that would allow individuals that are in this country illegally a path to citizenship through education and so forth. A lot of Republicans and skeptics would say, well, basically what you're doing is you're creating a safety net for a huge, large number of new Democrats coming into the voter rolls come 2016, 2012, or 2020 presidential elections. Do you agree with the DREAM Act? Do you think it's just a political ploy?
I think that was the rule of law matters in this country. It's a rock-bed constitutional principle, and essentially allowing people to bypass the rule of law is a fundamental non-starter for a lot of people in the Republican Party who are here legally and who are comporting with the law. You know, that said, this is an area where ultimately you're never going to get anywhere without some measure of compromise. And to not acknowledge the political and just the economic reality of the immigration situation in this country is probably, you know, is not the right path forward. But he makes a good point. The political realities in an election year make it unlikely that whole-scale immigration reform will see serious action in the contest of any legislative activity. Our Congress, frankly, can't figure out how to get together and pay its bills for a variety of reasons. We've got a lot of smoke and mirrors budgeting coming out right now. To think that we're going to see kind of a reemergence of immigration politics from a legislative perspective is highly unlikely in this Congress.
All right, last question to you both very quickly. Your scoop and prediction. What do you think the Supreme Court's going to do? Kristian.
I think it's highly unlikely that they find this constitutional. There's just too much evidence of federal preemption in this area that the federal government has always enforced it for the very reasons that I mentioned earlier, which is you cannot have a series of different immigration laws for all 50 states.
All right, Phil?
I think they may pick out a piece or two, but leave large pieces of the law intact.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Of course, thank you for joining us for this edition of Comcast Newsmakers on the Vote. I'm Robert Tranum. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.